love those island boys. Little girl, use your head. They will tear you up like a paper toy. Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, no, no, no. When they smile at you, darling, and wink, it's a lethal force that'll bring you down. Trying to get you tipsy like a drink. Love drunk girl.
Hi, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Rumbi.
Welcome to It's Layered.
We're in a long-distance friendship that started over 20 years ago when we were in high school.
We'll be talking all things life, love, family, anything and everything else under the sun.
Delve deeper with us because you know, Jine ma layers.
Upon layers, today we're super excited. We've got the beautiful, the talented Vongai Shava. Hi, Vongai.
Hey. I love that you're like, they're beautiful. And I'm like, beautiful? Are you talented?
Yes, you is.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, you are. And she just reminded us it's Black History Month in America. So
yes.
Yeah, when we're recording this, happy Black History Month. No better time to be blacker and more beautiful. So welcome, Vongai.
Thank you, Amanda and Rumbi, for having me on the show. I love traditionally, I used to hate this month because of the celebration that falls on the 14th of this month. We shall not speak of that day. And it's so interesting because you guys talk about it in an episode about like the stuff that used to happen at Pizza House and getting letters and mixtapes and all that jazz.
This is a traumatic event.
Oh my gosh. The same thing used to happen at like Arundel's where it's like where you're all in the hall at lunch and then one by one going up to get your roses. Anyway, I digress. But now I love this time of year because it's like black, all the black playlist, all the black capitalism, the black commercials, the black.
Yeah, about that.
I love it. It's inspirational. And then right after Black History Month in the US is Women's History Month. So I'm like, yes, to be a Black woman.
Yes. To just roll over.
Yes.
Awesome.
So it's like, yes, I still get to celebrate me because I am both.
Both, exactly. Well, thanks so much, Vongai, for being here. For anyone who doesn't know her, Vongai is an award-winning actor, singer, writer. She's based out in New York. For the last 6 years, she's worked in theater, film, television, and voiceovers. You may have heard her in a little movie called The Photograph, which we love as It's Layered, with Issa Rae, Stella McGee's directed movie. Before life in the Big Apple, she was born in Zimbabwe, raised in the United Kingdom and China. So this is going to be a really good episode for anyone listening because we are about to get into all of that.
Happy belated Lunar New Year. Everyone.
Yes, exactly. She has a BA in film and television studies from Brunel University and classically trained in acting, voiceover, and movement at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City. I mean, hello.
Yes, hello. She also hosts Zim Excellence, the podcast that we love and we know about her through as a podcast that spotlights Zimbabwe's change makers and trailblazers from across the globe. Her favorite things are spirituality, women's empowerment, and watching Marvel movies.
Hey.
Yes, I could watch all the Marvel movies all day, including the bad ones. I still regret watching the bad ones. No Way Home?
Yes.
Girl, we gotta talk. We can't. Oh, shh. If you have not seen it, your childhood self will thank you.
So please,
that's the end. The end.
Yeah, let's cut there.
The end.
Awesome.
Bring tissues.
Bring tissues. Okay. Noted.
Today we'll be talking about global citizenship or third culture kid, or there's so many versions of this term, but we want to delve deeper with someone who we view as an expert. You know how we always try to look for experts? Yes. We call ourselves experts. Yeah. So we try to look for our own expert, and Vongai was gracious enough to come on the podcast.
I am feeling so seen.
No, for sure.
If I could be an expert in something, I would want to be an expert in this.
That's great. And that's absolutely why we thought it would be amazing to have you on here. As we've heard in your bio, you born in Zimbabwe, live in the UK, China. Now you're based in New York, and you're still so young, so much ahead of you. You've accomplished so much. But for anyone who's listening who may not know, so what? Global citizen, Chi, what is that? Could you let us know how you define what it means to be a global citizen or a third culture kid, which is such a cool term, by the way. I love how it rolls off the tongue. But let's just not roll off tongues. Let's understand what we're rolling. You know what I mean?
Yes, what we're talking about. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, Vongai, can you let us know what it means to you and how you would define it?
So third culture kid, aka TCK, as the community calls it on the interwebs. There's a whole thing, TCK. I love it. Refers to someone was born in one place and is being raised in another place. So usually feels between cultures. That can include people who are the children of immigrants, and then the immigrants like settled in another country and then they're growing up in that country. To a degree, it can also include people who are first generation of a specific country as well. It can also sometimes include biracial children as well, because like you're dealing with parents from different cultures, and then you're also in your own culture as well. And so third culture kid, we're saying third culture because there is your parents' culture, the culture you're being raised under, and then the culture that you're being exposed to, and then bridging your own third culture in between. And then with global citizen, that is a term that was used to describe us as students when I went to Howard International School, Beijing in China. And so they were teaching us to be global citizens. And by that, they meant they wanted to come out. They wanted us to leave the school as people who were like thoughtful citizens and like considerate about the world around us. So part of the expensive tuition, international schools, was we would have an expedition every year into different parts of China. And so sometimes these expeditions would include trekking or helping out at orphanages or sleeping under like yak tents and all this different stuff. And I'm just being exposed to life outside of the city. So we also got to see, people who were living under the poverty line, and yet, how happy they were and like clueless as to like how poor they really are, but like how there was still this like foundation of community around them and helping each other out, which was like always so interesting to me, because then I could also, in these glimpses of seeing these people out in the villages or out in the countryside, it often reminded me of what it's like to be like Kumusha or like the rural areas in Zimbabwe as well. So yeah, global citizen as in you don't just care about where you're from, you care about the whole world, you care about world issues, you want to make this a better place, not just for yourself, but like for generations to come. And also this, I feel like through that term and what they were trying to get us to do through school, I have this appreciation for different cultures and trying to understand different cultures and different histories as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah,
what you say from me, I hear basically as a third culture kid, you kind of feel like you don't really have a set place to fit in, and you're kind of trying to find your way around in that space. I can relate to it. We spoke about this on the Zim Excellence Podcast, that born in Zimbabwe, lived in South Africa, then in Ghana, moved back, and having a bit of that experience. But you had an even
You're literally a third culture kid.
Exactly, but you're cross-continental, because not only in an African context, now you're moving to the UK, there's also China, different spheres of the world, and then now being in the US. So I completely know how that feels, and trying to bridge the gap of like, this is my culture, where my parents come from, where I was born. However, I have this other mindset and I'm exposed to other things. And then from what you describe as a global citizen is basically someone who is woke to things beyond their borders. Like, don't you feel like that's what as soon as you say, I was like, you woke, that's what you are. You're woke, and you actually care about people globally having a good life, or
yes, if we're saying woke in the original term of like being consciously aware, and not woke as in the woke police that attack people and cancel culture. I just want to set the record straight.
The former, definitely not the
original. That was the original woke.
Yes, the OG before, people be appropriating stuff from Black people, and then it turns into a thing, and then they blame the millennials when sometimes it was Gen Z, and it becomes a whole thing. But anyway, for anyone who's wondering, oh, am I a TCK? Is this me? I'd say like the old joke is, whenever someone asks you the question, where are you from? If that like brings up some like existential dread in you of how to begin to answer this question without telling a life story, then you're probably a third culture kid.
Yeah. So good.
I think also like some people hear the term third culture kid and they think, it can only happen in childhood. But if you lived a sheltered childhood, or like for me, I always think of Zim as a kid, and I always think of Australia as an adult, and those things are completely different. So like, when people ask me where you from, I feel so weird because then now I am an Australian citizen, but I grew up in Zim. So it's like, well, I lived in Zimbabwe when I was 18, but then when I was 18, you're pretty much starting out your other half of your life. So it's like, so then like I always find such an awkward question, because like, what really influences me? Is it my childhood, or is it the stuff I've learned when I had to grow up, and start paying bills? So
or
it's such a so I think third culture kid can be throughout your whole life, because it's like when you start to get heavily exposed into a certain culture that you have now adopted, but you might not necessarily have before.
We have all these just influences impacting our lives, and they say like as people we change every 7 years, which like makes a lot of sense. By the age of like around 7 and 8, that's when a child starts becoming aware of like all these kind of social contracts and how the world works. So around 7 and 8, if not before, we were starting to understand, oh, racism is a thing. Oh, women are treated differently. Oh, this person with like this disability is treated differently because they can't walk, or they can't do this, or they can't speak, or whatever, all these like different influences and factors. And it then becomes interesting if we're talking about global citizens, with the way the world is continuing to become more and more global with globalization and the mixing of different cultures. And it's like this bittersweet thing where it's like this beautiful thing where cultures continue to mix, and hopefully we'll begin to understand each other more and more. But then you have things that are lost in the process of all of this.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, like languages and what is culture, if cultures are mixing, like who owns this, who owns what. But otherwise, I did want to say you do have, people like Barack Obama is a third culture kid, because like he spent some time in Thailand. He was born in Hawaii. He's like, his dad's from Kenya. He spent time in Kenya and all of this. And like all these different factors and influences are just like impacting who he is as a person. Oh, the interesting thing I did want to bring up is, as an actor, I was talking to a fellow actor about this yesterday, who is also, to a degree, she's a third culture kid. She was born in India and then moved to the US when she was very young. But she finds when she goes into auditions, people are like, are you trying to hide an accent from us? And she's like, no, what do you mean? Because they can hear maybe some like Indian vowels or intonation or something. And then when she's trying to do like Bollywood films, they'll be like, it was great, you did wonderful acting, but we have to hire a voiceover actor because you sounded really American. And she's just like caught in the middle, just like completely confused as to like what's going on. So I guess you could call it science behind that is that your voice is affected by the places you've lived 5 years or more. So in theory, with that understanding, in theory, there's no such thing as an accent, which is just so interesting, because then as, I don't know, an actor who's asked to, so right now I have an audition for a Ghanaian character, but this Ghanaian character has lived in America for 5 years. So it's like, in theory, you could just give her like a Ghanaian accent, but then you're like, she's lived here for 5 years. She'd be sounding American at this point. Where is she living in America? Oh, she's living in New York. So then it becomes this thing of like, in theory, if you really want to do a really good dialect, you would break the material down and be like, okay, sprinkle Ghanaian there, sprinkle like American here, some maybe New York vowels or whatever, instead of just playing it straight. Because as people we don't just have like perfect accents as voices, because you're impacted by how your mother sounds, how your father sounds, the people you spend time with, the environment you live in. And so I also find that interesting. And so I guess in theory, you could say to a degree, like we're all global citizens, or a lot of us are. I would say no. I mean, with the voice thing, I could say yes, but I would say no. I'd say it, again, it has to do with like this being consciously aware of like the world around you and wanting more for the world around you. I have this, I guess it's like this philosophy or this personal belief system that I created for myself, that, we all live on planet Earth together, right? We're all citizens of the same planet. We're all one to a degree. Let's, take away all these, I guess, like borders in our mind, let's take away, like the borders physically will still exist, but like take away the invisible borders of like what separates us, religion, all of that stuff. So if we have like these 7 wonders of the world, I truly believe we should all, as citizens of this world, be able to enjoy them together. Just as when people say the slogan, Black history is American history, I'm like, Black history is world history, because there are Black people around the world. And so in theory, history is just history. We should all learn each other's histories. Because then we'll understand what's happening today. And then we'll understand how like different cultures work and functions, and all these different like social contracts of what might be like unacceptable in this culture, how it translates in another culture.
But I think though, we put those limitations because it's the idea of the human's desire to belong to something, and then there become that complexity is then thrown in, because we want, so I can belong to this because I am Black, I can belong to this because I come from these borders,
or I speak this way.
So when you find global citizens in the mix, and TCK as these third culture kids in the mix, it's like, well, they can hop between different worlds and kind of touch on different things in the world. So it gets complicated. We saw, I think, Tandy Newton, most people saw that video of her talking about her struggle.
You mean Tandiwe?
Tandiwe Newton struggle, her inner turmoil. And I know the streets were giving her a hard time, but I think she's a prime example of the dichotomy of being a sort of third culture kid, because she obviously sees her mom, identifies with her Black experience, whilst being a mixed race person who reaps the benefits of being a mixed race child with exposure to white spaces. And I think she's clearly publicly living out that turmoil and grappling with that, her journey. So there's so that makes me want to talk about like the judgment of being a third culture kid or a global citizen that then comes. Amanda, you've alluded to, and we've spoken many times about, the judgment. Where are you from? And you're like, oh, I'm Australian. No, but like, where are you really from? Like, you know what I mean? And like how having to break it down, especially when people don't share that experience. Like, what have you, I don't know, maybe Am, you can touch a bit more on that and how it feels. And then we can like dive into that a little bit, like being judged because you're not the Australian that they see. Vice versa,
And
the
it's
Zimbabwean
yeah,
that
exactly.
you're
It's like
expected to be.
and Vongai said this too. You get caught between you're not Zimbabwean enough, but you're also not Australian enough. So
Yes.
what are you? What are you? And like globalization, I think that's where it also comes to. Because I'm sure Ghanaians feel the same, Nigerians that are here feel the same. Like it's like you don't belong in either group anymore, and then you also don't belong in amongst yourselves. Like they have a term Afro-Australian, but there's so many countries.
That's a term?
There's also so many countries in Africa. It's like, but I can't relate to Moroccan Australia.
Yes.
You know, so it's like, well, are we now just being lumped together? Like,
Because it's easier.
It's easier, right? And I think also there's gatekeepers of certain cultures. So people will be like, oh, you're not Australian if you can't surf or if you can't. And if I didn't grow up surfing and I'm like, am I here? I ain't doing that. Then I don't get my Aussie card. So it's like, who are these gatekeepers? Should they rightfully be holding the key to being, and I think Zimbabweans as well, like trying to tie it back to us, we're very serial for this. If you don't act a certain way, speak a certain way, speak your Shona fluently or Ndebele fluently, then are you really Zimbabwean? And that's such an unfair stance because it's like, well, what makes you Zimbabwean, really? And I think those questions really need to be answered. And I'm still searching because it's so layered. And I don't know, sometimes is it judgment because people don't know? Is it judgment because it's something new? So people are like just nervous. Is it just mocking you to mock you? Are they jealous? It's so
interesting.
many layers.
I mean, I'm gonna begin with saying again, it's the difference between, being part of a community because you have this like common history or like common knowledge to be shared amongst you, these boxes that we put ourselves in, like Black, African, Zimbabwean, and the difference between, this whole idea of what I was saying about like removing those like internal borders that like separate us because, when one person hurts, we all hurt because we're all humans and we all have feelings, that's what I mean with like the separation. But like, of course, let's enjoy our safe spaces and all of that stuff. I find it interesting that you pose this question of whether or not, this comes as a result of, is it because people don't understand or is it new? And I feel like a couple of years ago, I felt like this was a new phenomenon, but like the more you dig into history, the fact that like before there were no borders, so people just freely traveled and traded and all of this stuff. So I find it so fascinating when Americans are talking about their ancestry and genealogy tests, right? Like where did their people come from? Especially when my Black friends do it out here and then they see like the small percentage of European and then like a big percentage of West African, and then it's like this fight of like, oh, I'm from Ghana and Nigeria, oh no, in a jollof or all of that stuff. But even within our people in Southern Africa, we can then see, oh, who came through, the kind of collective move that was happening from South Africa.
Yes.
Like some people were coming from Malawi, some people were coming from Congo, like some people were coming from because people just traveled all the time. And it was not that thing. It was just people just moved and traveled. And then eventually it was like you would settle and then you would be like, oh, my last name is this. My dad is an amazing man. I love my dad. He is great because he sat down and he created a family tree. And last year I was like really doing a lot of like generational work and generational trauma and all of this stuff and just trying to understand where I come from and are there like gifts that were passed on to me from like different people and just trying to get an understanding of like what my past is so that I'm able to share that with my future child, if that makes sense. I feel like when the racial protests started up in 2020, it was really something that was gnawing at my mind, being like, oh, who were Zimbabweans before colonialism? Like, what were our traditions before Western Christianity came in and said, oh, your belief systems were wrong and all of this stuff, just trying to understand that and trying to understand it from, I guess, a neutral perspective rather than like this is terrible that it's gone, or like, oh, this is good that it was gone situation. And so I'm looking through this family tree and I sit down with my mom, and she, like, the first thing I see is like 3 or 4 sets of names. And I'm like, what are these names? And then she's like, oh, those are the names that your family went by before the name you have now. I'm like, what? Like, that was it's sweet. So in another life, we were, I don't know, this family, insert name. I'm not going to give the names away, but like, we were like, insert this family. It's like, yeah. And they would change over time. And I'm like, who creates these rules that like they change? So I find that fascinating, because just as you have in, I guess, Western cultures where you would have Robertson, which means son of Robert, or I don't know, insert word, which means works on the boats or paves the tiles or something. You had a similar thing happening out here. Well, my great grandfather, he walked from Zambia to Zimbabwe. Like, that was a thing you did. Like, he walked, he had to possibly face animals, and yeah, but it doesn't make him any less Zimbabwean, because like he ended up settling in Zimbabwe.
For sure. I think on my mom's side, my mom was telling me that they descended from East Africa. Her family came from, so I was like, oh, and it's like, no one really belongs per se where they, it's kind of people just like, oh, I kind of like living here, I'm going to stay, so that's how
and then generations form. It's like a whole Abrahamic thing. It's like the Bible. It's like, let's go travel. Oh, we like it here. We stay here. And then maybe someone else leaves, and then they start, and then we're all like interconnected through Abraham, even though we live in different places. It's it's a blessing, but it's also confusing.
And sometimes conflict happens within families. Like, I know for me, we have a distant uncle who's not that distant, but because he was like, oh, screw you guys, and went inside his own family. So obviously, like 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years from now, this is going to be another branch that's like, they're actually related, but because there's just that break and he went somewhere else, it's like, you just never know.
To say, not to get political, but I'm like, that's basically like Judaism and Islam. They come from the same branch. But nobody wants to talk about that.
I mean, a lot of religions are branched in the, Anyway, do you guys see being a global citizen, or even a third culture kid? And like Rimbi and I are very conscious of this on our podcast, of trying to like not always speak from a place of privilege, try present like everyone's voices and everyone's feelings. Do you see it as like a luxury? Like, are we speaking from I traveled, so now I've got 3 cultures, accept me? Or because some people never travel, and you spoke about this, you talked about accents. Some people will have the same accent their whole life because they'll never have an influence of, unless they consciously go on TV and learn another accent. Or
to cut in, but they will have a tribal influence. Like,
no, but what I mean is the tribe won't be influenced by another. They could stay. You could grow up in Gokwe and die in Gokwe. You don't have to go anywhere else. You don't have to. So
even though your family is like from, I mean, your mom's from like, I don't know, Buhera, and your dad's from Mashingo. I don't know.
That's what but then you've now got that, and you could keep that until the day you die. Because you could then marry a guy who also grew up where you grew up. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, we don't all have the same experience. You can't say, oh, everyone's accent's going to change over time. That can't, like, you can't blanket any upbringing.
No, I meant like, if we were like breaking this down to linguistics, there's this idea that okay, so where were you born in Zimbabwe?
In Harare.
You were born in Harare. That like, there are distinct Harare vowels. If you're from Harare, you sound this way. So growing up, you probably would have heard words from one dialect, another dialect, and being in Harare.
And I could meet someone else who had the exact same experience as me. You can't say that can never happen.
The exact same, like, but their
background as me.
Yes, they can have the same background, but we also have to think about face muscularity. Like, this is when you have to then break it down as a science. Like, face muscularity, does the person has a lisp? Do they stutter?
Or maybe like, I think
the question
is really talking about a distinctly different experience. So like
Exactly.
obviously Zimbabwe has many influences from Mozambique, Malawi, and from surrounding South Africa. But I'm saying like to have a really distinctly different influence on our culture, oftentimes on how you speak or who you are, it oftentimes is about you moving or living in a different space or being, being removed from that place.
But not accent, because there's no, again, I'm dispelling this idea. There's no such thing as an accent because we're just influenced by all these different things.
But you can get similar people with similar accents. That's undeniable.
No, that's what I'm saying. So as someone who hears people's vowels, I'm dispelling the belief. So I'm going to say Rumbi and Amanda
different.
We do speak different. My brother has an American, like a very American accent, and mine tilts British. We have the exact same parents. We went to different schools, but we had different.
No, but if you had the exact same upbringing, would you have then the
So I speak very similarly to my sister, for example.
Yeah, some people.
My dad even confuses me and my sister when we.
I was about to say that on the phone.
Like, oh, hi, Sloni, and I'm like, it's you called my number.
So Rumbi and Amanda, I'm in agreement about this idea of having like, a distinct upbringing. When I say, I believe that the 7 wonders of the world should be enjoyed by everyone. I'm saying that from a point of, travel is a luxury and travel is a privilege, even just to like leave your village or leave your country. And, that pretty much sucks. And there needs to be more access. I put that on one side. Mm-hmm. Accent stuff, I'm putting to another side. I'm sorry, I'm going to fight this as someone who literally like hears things. Rumbi, I'm going to sit down with you and your sister, and I'm going to pull apart the different vowels and consonants and intonations that sound different between you and your sister. The average person will not hear them, but I will, because for a living, I listen to voice.
Then as the average person.
Yes. So that's why I'm saying.
As an average person, though, is this idea or is this upbringing a luxury? And that's probably why also people feel like they can mock it, they can judge it, especially coming from the Zimbabwean context. Because they're like, well, you're a salad. Well, you grew up in this, in China, whatever. Of course, you're different. So when you come back home, they feel like you're on another pedestal. So we need to bring you down a few notches.
That's why they hate on the third culture kid experience, For example, I remember I would go visit my grandma and cousins, and it was kind of like, oh, this girl, because we lived at that time, I think in Ghana, and you felt kind of ousted because you're different and your parents kind of made a different choice to what is quote unquote the norm to what was seen back home. I do believe it goes both ways in terms of being a third culture kid being a luxury, traveling being a luxury, and it being a necessity. If you think about from a Zimbabwean perspective, a lot of people moved from Zim or were quote unquote displaced out of economical reasons. So it became more of a necessity. However, the implication is if you go out and make a better life for yourself, you're going to make more money. Therefore, it is a luxury because you can afford certain things. But it's like, no, I actually did it because I couldn't survive within this framework.
Well, we then have to bring... Sorry.
And then I think the judgment then now becomes around you did this and thought you decided to make a better life for yourself. So now you're coming back and showing off or thinking you're better than me. That's how I see it on one end. On the other end, where I am currently in the Czech Republic, people feel no desire or no need to travel beyond their frame of reference because life for them is good and they have the luxury of a good life. Where traveling is like, why would I want to do that? Unless I'm going to the mountains to ski, that's a different, like Italy to ski. I don't need to. If I really want to go to the beach, I'm going to go to Croatia. Do you understand? So there's also the luxury in being able to like, I don't need to do that. Why do I need to hop on a flight? Like, so it kind of goes both ways. I think often travel is like put in this great light, like, oh, travel, holiday. But there's a lot of, if you think about just the traffic from Zim SA or Zim Botswana, it's not luxury for the most part. It's a necessity. It's like, I'm going to find some hustle, buy some things that I'm going to resell, or I need to survive and live. So it's tricky for me. I don't know how you feel, Vongai, on that, like in terms of like the luxury aspect of it that people often judge, and it's quick to come to people's mind, and like whether it's a necessity.
It's really great that you bring those two kind of, I don't know how you, again, it's still 8 a.m. here in New York, so my brain isn't fully functioning
early,
with
guys.
the words.
It's early for Vongai.
I love that you bring these two images to mind of like the travel you see on Instagram, which is people on yachts and picture perfect, filter perfect photos and vacations and all of that, and how within the same group you can have like, well, I have no desire to go and see the world and learn things. I'm not
Which
there.
is wild,
then,
right? Like, it's like, how can
yes, I'm
like
just
that?
like, wait, what? How can what? You have the okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
it's a free world. And then the image of you know, the necessity of wanting a better life for yourself, for your children, just for survival. This is when it gets even more complicated because she made my layers. Within that second image, if we're basing this home Zimbabwe, like, you know, the idea that you said, people think, oh, all the people that have left, you guys are popping bottles and living your life, da, da, da. Or like you said about just, you know, having the means to go by a car or bus to Botswana, for example. You then also have to, you bring it down another layer of saying, not only is travel potentially expensive, well, I know it to be expensive, it is also very paperwork heavy. So the requirements and qualifications and I don't know, all the stuff, documents that you need to fulfill to be able to get a visa or to be able to cross the border is another thing. So even if we're saying the person who is going from being displaced out of Zimbabwe to a neighboring country versus the people who are going to Bali on some sort of, you know, spiritual quest. I mean, I don't blame them. I want that for myself. The former may seem like, I guess, if we're saying this is some sort of pyramid, I don't know why I'm making a pyramid, but I guess it is now. The one where it's like the person is going out of necessity falls below it. Falls below the trip to Bali or the trip to, I don't know, Mykonos or something, somewhere extravagant that's like on Instagram, right? So that one is falling below that. And then below that are the people who don't even have a couple dollars to just ensure money on their table or money to send their child to school. So it's then this weird thing of levels where like the person who is leaving the country out of necessity is then more privileged than another person.
Yes, 1,000%. Because they are able to access the money to get the visa or the paperwork done, or to pay for that ticket, whether it's bus or train or whatever means they go across. And
sometimes it's not even like, you know, the person had the money in their account. It can be a crowdsourcing, community-led. Oh, we're all going to make sure that Rumbi gets to South Africa or gets to this place where hopefully she can find a job cleaning this. And from that on, see what goes on. I don't know.
And mind you, though, people who are passing a judgment usually have one idea. So they're not going to go into the layers of travel. They're just going to be like, whether you're going for Bali, whether you're going for a bus ticket, you're traveling.
You're bougie.
Like,
you're out.
You're going, you know? So when people are passing judgment, they don't really give you that space to explain and go into the layers. They're just like, as long as you're going somewhere, you're now different.
And oftentimes people make those moves under wraps anyway. So you're not explaining to every family member, hey, if I tell you the paper, oh my gosh, and then I have to do this. And then I have to, no one really shares that, especially not, I don't know your experience, but in the Zim context that I've experienced, nobody shares the process thereof. Hence maybe the amplified judgment, because like, oh, all of a sudden she just jetting off to not knowing what it entails, you know.
I feel like it's two things. Again, this is something I've learned as an actor. We never want to put ourselves in the position of the other person to understand, you know, how they acted and why they acted. So no one is going to pause for a second to be like, oh, do you know what? Rumbi was presented with this opportunity. Had I been presented with this opportunity, can I confidently say, no, I'm staying in Zimbabwe? Like, you know, like, and so there's that one side. And then as you were alluding to your experience with keeping things under wraps, it's because I feel like there's very much this thing in our culture of like, we can't have bad vibes surrounding this. Like we can't just tell everyone because, you know, they'll put bad vibes out. They'll like go to Nanga, they'll curse you. Like, you know, they'll talk to everyone about this thing. And then like, if the thing fails, it's then everyone knows the things. Yes.
For sure. But yeah, I think for that being said, in being or in feeling different or feeling like you don't really belong, there's also the desire to uphold your culture. And I feel it more since I left home, obviously, because I think maybe you're trying to search for that grounding and that kind of, you know, a piece of home wherever you are. How do we even like maintain the essence of who we are in spaces where we are a minority? Because you're also a minority even when you move to another country, and you ladies could talk on this, you know, like I'm here in the Czech Republic as a Zimbabwean person. My experience is very distinctly different to other Zimbabweans I know of here who maybe just moved from Zimbabwe to the Czech Republic. I have additional layers to my experience. And so I can't say definitively mine is the Zimbabwean experience, because it's absolutely not. But you still try to hold onto elements of your culture, be it through language. As you can see behind me, I have, you know, an African, you know, something hanging on my wall, you know, trying to feel connected. Like, and how do you hold on to that? And then who gives us the permission to quote unquote maintain that when we're saying, I don't quite feel connected to my culture in this aspect, but I'm only going to pick and choose what I feel connected to. Do you get what I mean? Like, if we're going to keep it 100, it's like, do we take it all? Like, how do you maintain that connection to home, which is not really home?
Well, even home doesn't keep the connection. Like, we live with electricity, and like, we didn't grow up. Like, if you look at our ancestors, it's not like they were living the same experience.
Exactly.
So it's kind of unfair that it can't evolve, it can't change. It's like, yeah, this gatekeeping issue is just like when you go back home and people are trying to tick off a list. Can you still cook? Can you still do this? Can you still make mona salsa? Can you still? And it's like, okay, like even if I lost some of those things, like unfortunately, probably with life and experiences, some things will fall away, right? That's how and cultures evolve. Yeah. But it's almost like sometimes in Zimbabweans, it's like set, like you cannot. And I don't know if it's just our nature or but especially women, like I mean, Rumbi and I talk about this all the time, where you go back home and it's like you put it through a test of things like, can you still cook pamoto, can you do this, can you do that, and you're like,
goodness me.
Like just to disprove that have not lost your culture. At the same time, it is important to hold on to some of these things. So
it's layered. You know, my layers.
Like, I've come to the conclusion like 2 years ago that home is something I'm cultivating within myself. Like, am I feeling okay and at home in my body first and in my mind before I decide to feel at home in a physical space?
Bars. Bars. I once watched this TED talk, I forget who it was by. It said, don't ask me where I'm from, ask me where I'm local. And I think you just took it to another place, which is like, don't ask me necessarily where I'm local, but like who I am, basically. Because like if you make yourself home and yourself home, it's like finding that rooting, what grounds you, what, roots you and who you are. So that's beautiful.
It's like that question, instead of what do you do, what are you passionate about?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is the thing, right? Because it's such a tumultuous thing that I think looking at the three of us, we all have that tension. There's definitely a tension that comes with being a global citizen and a third culture kid. I'm curious to know from you, Vongai, in your experience, is there anything that you wished had been different, or like growing up with your experience? On your podcast, you shared about how also feeling different when you moved back to Zim, because you lived elsewhere, then moved back to live in Zim, and you have that, and that.
So it was, in theory, my first time in Zim. Yeah.
Yes. So do you wish anything happened differently, or do you regret any of how that played out for you?
I kind of wish that my introduction or reintroduction to Zimbabwe, because I was born in Zimbabwe,
yes,
but then moved to the UK when I was very young. And we would make trips back and forth to Zimbabwe, but they were so short that I barely remember them. But my mom's recollection is like, I loved it, and I was out and I was running and I was playing with people and all this stuff, just being free as a child. And then moved back, we moved back when I was 7. And again, we change as people every 7 years, just because developmental stuff, hormonal stuff, all the outside factors influencing us. I would love if my reintroduction to Zimbabwe, to home, had been a more positive one. Because, and this could be me misremembering history, because again, I was so young, but I remember being excited. I mean, in my mind, I thought Zimbabwe was a Caribbean island. So I was excited. I'm like, oh, palm trees, it's going to be hot. Yay, vacation. Like, cool. It doesn't snow. It's not cold like London. Oh, wow, super hot. And I kind of had this idea that would be paradise. And I feel like at the time I was faced with like, oh, Hatari Shona, this. And just not even that, it was just like the culture shock of things being different, like breakfast foods being different, sounds being different, again, different weather. And I guess that, and then also then going to school and then being bullied like I was, which kind of like tainted the idea of paradise that I had. And it's something that I'm still working on healing, because then when I speak to people like y'all who, were there since birth without interruption, your experience of Zimbabwe is different from my experience of Zimbabwe.
Well, mine was interrupted for sure.
And I was bullied.
Okay. Okay.
For
But
sure.
like, sorry. Okay. Let us not assume and project.
Yeah.
But like, from people who say like, oh, like, when I was in Zimbabwe and people are like, oh, you're home. Oh, you're so lucky. Like, I miss it. And when people, reference their childhood and their time there, it's something I don't quite understand and will never understand. And it sometimes makes me feel sad.
So when I moved back to Zim, I was 10 years old, like when we moved back from Ghana to Zim. And it had been sold to me by my parents, like an amazing place. And then it was just like the decline of the economy happened soon after our return. So like, so there was that mind if like, wait, what? They said it was going to be
paradise,
like, so I
is this the same Zimbabwe that y'all said you was growing up in? Because I feel cheated. I want my money back.
Exactly. And like for me, I moved schools, and like it's like one of those things when you move. My mom was sick as well when I was in primary school, so that's also another thing people use against you. And that was when the AIDS pandemic was huge. So as soon as you're sick, people just think, oh, she's got like. So it's funny because it's like I think, and I was just gonna say this about childhood in general. It's so layered, and people find anything to make you an outlier. So sometimes you think, oh, people didn't like me because I was a third culture kid. But is it because to them, what the general wolf pack was you're different? Because in some schools, third culture kids were celebrated. Like, oh, she's from the States, and people love that and follow you. And so obviously for your
Not a
experience,
mascot.
it was the opposite. Yeah, but someone else could have an experience where they were like, oh, America, I'm not going to go back because Kunoku, like here, I'm the thing, I'm the one people are following. Rumbi's experience as well, where it's like, oh, that's not what I pictured. Like,
and my accent too. I had
your
accent influence on my accent. They're like, what?
And for me, they're like, why are you moving schools? Who are your real friends? And I don't have connection. That's why when I went to high school, it was so important for me to have 6 years just at one school because I could have that solid, and obviously when you have a parent who's sick, you're in and out of school and so boarding school was a good ground. So obviously I just think sometimes when we're kids, it's such a pivotal time, but it's also such a sad time because we put this thing like, this is the reason why. And it's like, there's so many layers.
Myriad of reasons why that happened.
Why, and it sucks that we all got bullied, but or whatever happened to us, for whatever reason.
I think just as I was saying that, like, I'll never truly understand, the connection that my parents have to Zimbabwe or other people have when they're like, oh, home, oh, I miss it so much. I hate it here in the UK. I hate it here in America, or whatever, I like part of my grieving processes and why I had to then dig deep into this generational healing and generational trauma is then understanding that my child's connection to wherever they will be born, I will not understand that. And my child will not understand what my upbringing was. And 1000%.
That's
it's such a mind F in that way. It's like, yo, how can this, And I think to speak to people who feel like, oh, I want to be home, I don't like it in the UK or whatever, it is because they are having the experience of being ousted and you are different and made and everyone makes you feel that way. And you only belong because you are labor or because you provide a service. That's all you're wanted there for. Whereas, back home, you have, relos who don't do jack living off the rest of the family, but they still belong. You know what I mean? Like it's because when you leave home, you have to provide something that you must bring value. That's all. Do you get what I mean? And it becomes, is this all I'm worthy or good for? Is just me breaking my back, working however many jobs. Like, do you get what I mean? So there's also that added layer of it all. We've spoken a lot about the complexities of it. Like, maybe for me, though, I want to say, like, the beautiful thing about being a third culture kid is I can relate to a lot more people and have the empathy towards people because I know everything is not as it seems, you're able to be like, this guy's kind of a douche, but he's probably never met someone like me. And he's probably trying to be like, oh, what are you doing here? Like, we just move with a different level of empathy, if that makes sense. What are some of the things? And awareness. Yeah. What makes you guys at least what makes it worth it? Because ultimately people who don't see being a global citizen worth it, they just move back home. Do you get what I mean? So what makes it worth it for you to continue to exist as a global citizen or as, I don't really think you choose that often to be a third culture kid. So that's a bit different, but
it's sprung upon you and you're like, this, exactly. Not everyone is like this.
We here? Okay.
What? I'm different?
Exactly. So what makes it worthwhile for you?
This is going to sound very woo-woo AF. At the end of the day, I guess it's connecting with as many people as possible and trying to understand all of our differences and all of these wonderful things that make our world so that, when we're then sitting down and things happen in the news, I'm not the person who's scrambling, I don't know, looking for an Asian friend to understand Asian issues and looking for a Jewish friend to understand Jewish issues or a gay friend to understand what's happening in the queer community, all of that stuff. Yeah. Because I'm moving by default as someone who's hungry to understand the world.
Oh my God, yes.
That's beautiful.
Open.
Say it again. Can you repeat that, please? I'm moving by.
I'm moving by default as someone who's hungry to understand this world. Yeah. And then also, again, this whole age thing, as I get older, I then start to think, I could be giving birth to someone who identifies as such and such or falls under this community. I don't know who their dad is. I don't know yet. I don't know if I've met him yet. I don't know. Or like falls under this community or this religion or whatever, or I give birth to a child who later identifies under this religion or identity or sexual or whatever. So then I also have to keep that in mind for what type of human being do I want to bring into this world?
Yeah. And the world is moving that way, whether you like it or not. Globalization is, that's how, even with COVID, if you look at it, if you were only staying in our little pockets, it might have been a totally different thing. But because we're traveling, we're seeing things, everyone was affected. And it's one of those things, I think, and both of you ladies said it so beautifully, where it's like, because you're curious beings, you want to know more, you want to learn more. It just expands your mind. And I think that's what makes it worthwhile. Like, who doesn't want to learn something new or have something new shown to them or, grow? Because it's, I don't know, for me, it just feels like such a vital part of humankind. We need to keep growing. So
isn't it interesting? And as we wrap up, I just wanted to point this out. Isn't it interesting? We all see the value of it. But the choice ultimately of us being the third culture kids was never ours per se. Like it was kind of sprung on us or out of necessitated for us. And I think it's a beautiful way to then take a circumstance and then make your life what it is. And I think that is also the beauty of life, is making the most wherever you find yourself and like wherever you see yourself going. But thank you so much and for your time, Vongai. I think you've brought up a lot of things that we can think about as individuals, as a society, as a community. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you to share any final thoughts about the topic, or just let us know where we can find you, Vongai, where we can keep up with you. We've already mentioned Zim Excellence Podcast a couple of times in this podcast. So if you ain't with it, get with it. She's spoken to some really incredible Zimbabwean,
including Amanda and Rumbi.
Thank you. But like some really wonderful trailblazers, and she's making moves in her own. She's made moves and is making moves in her own right. Representing Zimbabwe so beautifully. And I think just by the fact that she started the podcast, Zim Excellence, is just truly a testament to your spirit and what you are doing to represent the culture, even though you are a third culture kid. Does that make sense? Like, it's like you can still celebrate us. It's a beautiful thing, that
it is beautiful
that you still continue. So any final thoughts from you, Vongai, and also where everybody can catch up with you and see you and hear what's up?
Well, thank you, Amanda and Rumbi, for bringing me on. I hope this wasn't too heavy and too a downer and too complicated and complex. Thank you for seeing in Zim Excellence exactly what you guys are doing by having these discussions and these tough conversations about the Zimbabwean community and just life, itself. I would say people can definitely find me at Vongai Official on Instagram or Twitter. I'm more focused on Instagram. Yeah, Twitter got too political for me. So I host the Zim Excellence Podcast. There should be about 34 episodes up right now. I'm currently on a hiatus. You can follow the Instagram, which is at Zim Excellence Podcast. I've used this existence and inner turmoil and like existential dread of being a third culture kid to say, I never want anyone to feel the way that I felt, to feel unseen, unheard, pushed to the side or like made and belittled. So I try and bring that in everything that I do. So with that said, constantly believe in yourselves. You are enough. You are worthy. If you're listening to this episode, it means you are alive to see another day and you're breathing. And that means you've still got a purpose to fulfill on this planet. So walk your path like a runway and own it.
Hey,
Love this. Oh my God. It's like, And your voice is so soothing.
Yeah, I'm like,
so easy just to be like,
give me
I need you to do daily affirmations for me.
Please.
Well, guys, that should be a side hustle.
You can hire me to record affirmations.
Yes,
I actually do. I have a buy me a coffee. And if you guys want to shout out on Zim Excellence or you want your affirmations, hit me up and I will do that for you. I'll record a happy birthday message for your people. Yeah, hit me up.
Love this.
Yeah, super.
Vongai, that just shows your growth. Like, seriously, to turn something that you might have found, some people might have found negative and totally turned their back to, into something that's a labor of love, a labor of light, is something that's to be celebrated within you. So pat on your back and keep going. We love your podcast. We love to see your guests because a lot of times as well, again, we're curious people. We want to know new things, and Zimbabweans sometimes can be very disconnected from each other. And it's nice to go, oh my gosh, I didn't know there was that photographer in LA, or that was so amazing. What you're doing is amazing. Keep going. I'm sure it's very hard work. So we really do appreciate
currently
you doing
a one-woman team, and if there's sponsors out there, I will take your coin. People want it to turn into video, and before I turn it into video, I need some coin.
There you go.
Awesome.
Rimbi, any last thoughts?
No, honestly, just thank you. I think she just blessed us with that. Her final word, just like shower, that warm shower you stepped into on a cold day, just warmed us up.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into this episode of It's Layered with our special guest, Vongai Shava of Zim Excellence Podcast. As always, hit us up. Let us know what you think. We're on Instagram, It's Layered. Twitter, It's Layered Pod. And you can email us, it's layeredpod@gmail.com. And as always, great to have you here with me. And Vongai, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And we'll see you on the next episode, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.